The courtroom had seen arrogance before, but never anything like this. What began as a routine dispute instantly transformed into one of the most explosive moments in daytime television. Karen Mitchell, a woman already infamous in her community for her entitled outbursts, crossed a line no one dared to imagine. In front of millions of viewers, under the unblinking studio lights, she pointed her finger directly at Judge Judy and hurled the accusation that froze the room. "You only rule against people like me because you're racist." The silence that followed was suffocating. Gasps rippled through the audience like a wave. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every stunned expression. Even the bailiff, seasoned by decades of tense hearings, shifted uncomfortably at the unprecedented charge. For a moment, Judge Judy said nothing. Her sharp eyes locked on Karen as if weighing the weight of the words just spoken. But every viewer at home felt it. This was no ordinary case anymore. This wasn't about small claims, property disputes, or petty neighborhood arguments. This was about character, truth, and the dangerous gamble of weaponizing accusations. Karen, however, misread the silence. She smirked, believing she had gained the upper hand. What she didn't know was that her reckless outburst had just set the stage for the most devastating takedown in Judge Judy's career. Because while Karen thought she had exposed bias, she had no idea that her own comments, shocking, cruel, and deeply offensive, were about to be exposed on live television. And what came next didn't just humiliate her. It turned her into a national symbol of hypocrisy. So if seeing accountability in action matters to you, smash that like button right now. Because what's about to unfold will show exactly why truth always cuts deeper than lies. Karen Mitchell hadn't just walked into the courtroom that day. She had strutted in. Every step of performance rehearsed for weeks. Her blonde highlights were fresh from the salon, her blazer carefully chosen to project authority, and her designer handbag clutched like a trophy. To her, this wasn't a trial. It was a stage, and she intended to make herself the star. The case itself was nothing remarkable on paper, a simple dispute, the kind Judge Judy had presided over thousands of times. Yet Karen had convinced herself it was bigger than that. She wasn't here merely to win a judgment. She was here to prove a point. She believed she was smarter than America's toughest judge, more persuasive than any evidence, and shrewd enough to bend the system in her favor. She even bragged to friends and neighbors that she would use the courtroom to show the world who Judy really is. Behind the bench, Judge Judy studied Karen with the quiet patience of someone who had seen it all. 25 years on the family court bench, tens of thousands of cases, and an uncanny ability to sense manipulation from the moment a litigant opened their mouth. Judy had earned her reputation as a human lie detector. And in those first minutes, she recognized the type immediately. A litigant who believed attitude could substitute for facts. But Karen's misplaced confidence wasn't built on evidence. It was built on delusion. She had spent nights practicing comebacks in front of the mirror, scrolling through online forums to cobble together pseudo-legal arguments, and convincing herself that the audience would side with her once she framed Judy as unfair. To her, the cameras weren't a threat. They were an opportunity. She imagined the headlines, the viral clips, the admiration of those who would see her as a fearless woman standing up against authority. What she didn't realize was that Judge Judy had already begun piecing together the truth. With every arrogant glance, every smug smirk, every unnecessary flourish in Karen's answers, the judge was cataloging not just a case, but a pattern. And as Karen basked in her illusion of control, the audience could feel the storm quietly forming on the horizon. Because this wasn't the story of a woman exposing injustice. It was the story of arrogance walking straight into a trap, one that Judy had been setting from the very first question. It didn't take long for Karen's arrogance to move from confidence into outright disrespect. Judge Judy asked a straightforward question, one that should have been answered with simple facts. Instead, Karen leaned back in her chair, rolled her eyes for all to see, and launched into a monologue dripping with condescension. Her tone wasn't just defensive. It was laced with the kind of contempt reserved for someone who believes the person across from them is beneath them. The audience murmured, sensing the tension rising. Judy's expression remained unreadable, but her eyes sharpened, watching every word, every exaggerated gesture. Still, Karen pressed on. She dismissed the plaintiff's account with a smirk, insinuated that the entire proceeding was biased, and then delivered the line that would send shockwaves through the courtroom. "You always rule against people like me. Admit it. It's because you're racist." The words landed like a thunderclap. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Gasps rippled through the rows of spectators. Even the cameras hesitated, zooming in to capture the sheer audacity etched across Karen's face. This wasn't an argument anymore. It was an accusation, one aimed not just at Judge Judy, but at the very integrity of the courtroom itself. Judy didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her gaze fixed on Karen with a weight that only decades of authority could command. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, until the tension was nearly unbearable. The bailiff shifted slightly as though bracing for the explosion everyone expected. But still, Judy said nothing. Karen, mistaking the silence for hesitation, smiled smugly. She thought she had caught Judy off guard. She believed she had flipped the power dynamic. In her mind, she had just painted herself as a victim and Judy as the villain. What Karen didn't know was that she had just walked into the very center of the trap. Because if there's one thing Judge Judy never tolerated, it was manipulation dressed as righteousness. And she was about to show Karen, and the millions watching, what happens when arrogance tries to masquerade as justice. The accusation hung in the air like smoke after an explosion, thick and impossible to ignore. Everyone expected Judge Judy to strike back instantly, to unleash the kind of fury that had humbled thousands of arrogant litigants before. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned back slightly, her hands folded neatly on the bench, and spoke with a calmness that was more unnerving than anger. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said evenly, her voice steady and deliberate, "are you certain you want to continue down this road?" The audience held their breath. Karen blinked, surprised by the restraint. In her mind, this was proof that she had landed a blow. Smirking, she doubled down. She raised her voice, speaking over Judy's measured tone, insisting that the court was biased against her, that she represented people who never get a fair shot. Each word she spoke dug her deeper into the hole she didn't realize she was creating. Judy, unshaken, scribbled a note on her pad and nodded ever so slightly. The cameras caught the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the telltale sign that she had just made a decision. What Karen mistook for hesitation was, in fact, calculation. Judy wasn't about to let the outburst slide. She was building a foundation, layer by layer, for the precise moment when the truth would crush Karen's entire performance. The silence between Karen's rants became a weapon. Judy allowed her to ramble, to trap herself in contradictions, to show the world exactly who she was without interruption. Every time Karen thought she had seized control, Judy's calm demeanor reminded the audience where the real power rested. Those who had watched Judy for decades recognized the signs immediately: the slight narrowing of her eyes, the patience that felt less like tolerance and more like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The trap was already set, and Karen was walking deeper into it with every smug sentence. What Karen didn't know was that Judy's producers had already pulled records, statements and footage from Karen's past, and soon those receipts would shatter her false narrative in front of the entire nation. The moment of reckoning arrived quietly, almost too quietly for Karen to notice. Judge Judy lifted her gaze from the notes she had been making and signaled toward the court assistant. A folder was placed in front of her, thick with pages, transcripts, and printed screenshots. Judy flipped it open, her expression unreadable, and then looked directly at Karen. "You've made a serious accusation," Judy said firmly. "So let's look at the facts. Not your story, not your feelings. The facts." Karen shifted uneasily, her confidence faltering for the first time. The judge pulled out a page and began to read aloud, lines from an HOA meeting transcript where Karen had referred to certain neighbors in language so ugly, so unmistakably prejudiced, that the audience erupted in audible gasps. Karen's face flushed as whispers filled the room. Judy didn't stop there. She moved on to printed screenshots, social media posts, comments that Karen had written under her own name, posts that mocked immigrants, disparaged entire communities, and revealed a pattern of behavior that stripped her earlier accusation of any credibility. The irony was undeniable. The woman who had just accused Judy of racism was now being exposed as the one with a history of racist remarks. Karen tried to interrupt, stammering about context, claiming it was all taken out of proportion, but Judy silenced her with a single raised hand. The judge's voice cut through the noise, sharp and deliberate. "You don't get to hide behind accusations when your own words condemn you." The camera zoomed in on Karen's face. Gone was the smug grin. In its place was the dawning realization that her performance was collapsing. Every receipt Judy revealed was another brick in the wall closing in around her. The audience no longer viewed her as a victim. They saw her for what she truly was, a hypocrite caught in the very trap she thought she had set for someone else. For the millions watching at home, it was the exact kind of moment that keeps them glued to their screens. The shocking reversal, the instant when arrogance crumbles under the weight of truth. And if you believe truth always finds its way out, comment the word exposed right now, because what just happened made history in Judge Judy's courtroom. The atmosphere in the courtroom had changed completely. Just moments before, Karen believed she was steering the narrative, painting herself as a victim of bias. Now her own words, cold, undeniable, and preserved in black and white, were echoing back at her, each one louder than the last. The audience, once silent with shock, began to murmur with outrage. Heads shook in disbelief, gasps turned into whispers, and whispers into open condemnation. In the plaintiff's chair sat Maria Rodriguez, her eyes brimming with tears. For years she had endured Karen's harassment, letters filled with threats, condescending remarks about her heritage, and the kind of hostility that corrodes a family's sense of safety. With Judy's exposure of Karen's comments, Maria finally found her voice. Shaking, she rose and addressed the court. "This is the woman who called my children names. This is the woman who told me people like us didn't belong in her neighborhood." Her voice cracked, but the truth carried more weight than any polished speech. The audience broke into applause, unable to contain their support. Even the cameras captured faces streaked with emotion, viewers at home no doubt feeling the same surge of righteous anger. For Karen, the moment was devastating. She slammed her hand on the table, insisting it was all lies, begging Judy to rein her authority back in. But the harder she fought, the deeper her credibility sank. Judge Judy remained still, letting the uproar speak for itself. When she finally raised her hand, the courtroom fell silent instantly. Her eyes locked onto Karen, not with anger, but with the kind of icy authority that demanded absolute obedience. "The problem isn't my court, Mrs. Mitchell," she said coldly. "The problem is you." Karen's composure was unraveling. She muttered excuses, reached for explanations that no one was buying, and cast desperate glances at the audience, hoping to find sympathy. But there was none. The courtroom, once her stage, had turned into her prison, and every spectator, every viewer, every voice in that room stood firmly on the other side. It was no longer Judge Judy versus Karen. It was the truth versus hypocrisy, and Karen was losing on every front. The tension in the courtroom had reached its breaking point. The audience was united against Karen. The plaintiff's testimony had struck a chord, and the evidence of Karen's hypocrisy was undeniable. All eyes turned to Judge Judy, waiting for her to deliver the verdict that everyone sensed was coming. The silence before her words was heavier than any gavel. Judy leaned forward, her voice low but razor-sharp. "Mrs. Mitchell, you accused this court of racism. You pointed your finger at me and declared that truth and justice do not live here. But let me remind you, truth doesn't need defending. It reveals itself. And today, it revealed you." Karen shifted uncomfortably, her hands twisting together as though trying to wring an escape from the inevitable. Judy's tone hardened. "You don't get to smear others with accusations when your own record is riddled with prejudice. You don't get to weaponize lies in a place where truth is sacred." The audience erupted into applause, but Judy raised her hand, silencing them as swiftly as she had silenced Karen. Her ruling was delivered with finality. The plaintiff is awarded full damages. Mrs. Mitchell, your behavior in this courtroom and your documented record have destroyed any credibility you thought you had. You leave here today with nothing except the consequences of your own words. The gavel came down, the sound echoing like thunder. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was a public execution of arrogance. Karen's face flushed crimson, her composure shattered. She stood abruptly, sputtering protests, but the bailiff's firm step toward her was enough to halt her defiance. The cameras caught her trembling, caught the tears she had fought to suppress, caught the exact moment arrogance broke under the weight of accountability. For the audience, for the millions watching at home, it was the climax they had been waiting for. Justice wasn't just served, it was carved into stone, delivered with Judy's legendary precision. Karen had walked into the courtroom convinced she would expose bias. Instead, she had been exposed piece by piece until there was nothing left but the truth. And as Judy set down her pen and folded her hands once more, her expression carried the message louder than words: respect the truth, or be destroyed by it. The case may have ended in the courtroom, but its shockwaves traveled far beyond those four walls. Within hours of airing, Clips of Karen's accusation and Judy's devastating rebuttal flooded social media. The moment Karen hurled the word racist at Judge Judy was replayed endlessly, followed immediately by the receipts that exposed her own prejudiced comments. Side-by-side comparisons circulated online, with captions that cut to the core. Accuser becomes the accused. Hashtags erupted across platforms. Karen exposed trended worldwide within minutes, followed closely by Thatcher receipts don't lie. Viewers posted their own reactions, some laughing at Karen's downfall, others expressing outrage at her hypocrisy, and many praising Judy for her calm dismantling of the false narrative. Memes appeared overnight, freezing Karen's smug smirk in one frame and her tearful collapse in the next. The fallout didn't stop at the internet. Local news stations picked up the story, labeling it one of the most humiliating takedowns in courtroom television history. Talk shows debated the cultural impact of weaponizing accusations without evidence. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to analyzing how Judy had turned the accusation back on the accuser with surgical precision. Meanwhile, Karen's own life began to unravel. Neighbors who had once tolerated her outbursts distanced themselves. HOA members convened an emergency meeting, not only to remove her from leadership but to discuss potential civil action. Families who had suffered under her hostile remarks came forward with renewed courage, emboldened by seeing her finally face consequences. For Maria Rodriguez and her family, the episode brought long-awaited relief. The judgment in her favor was more than financial, it was vindication. For years she had been painted as the troublemaker, the outsider, the one who didn't belong. Now the truth had been broadcast to millions, and for the first time she felt the weight of injustice lift from her shoulders. By the end of the week, the clip had amassed tens of millions of views. Karen Mitchell had dreamed of becoming viral, but not like this. She was no longer remembered for her case. She was remembered as the woman who accused Judge Judy of racism, only to be destroyed by her own words. The roar of the internet eventually faded, the news cycle moved on, and the courtroom lights dimmed. But the lesson from that day didn't vanish, it grew louder. People weren't just talking about Karen's downfall. They were reflecting on what it meant. Because this wasn't just another viral courtroom clip. It was a cautionary tale about the danger of using false accusations as weapons, and the inevitable reckoning when truth finally steps into the light. Judge Judy had seen it all before. Arrogance cloaked as righteousness, entitlement disguised as courage, manipulation dressed up as moral outrage. But rarely had the hypocrisy been so perfectly exposed in real time, for millions to witness. Karen had believed she could shout louder than the facts. She thought she could smear someone else's name to protect her own. And in doing so, she revealed her true self to the entire world. That's why the moment struck such a chord. Viewers weren't just cheering for Judy. They were cheering for accountability. They were cheering for every time they had been lied about, manipulated, or unfairly accused. They were cheering for the idea that no matter how powerful or smug someone may seem, truth still has the final word. Karen had entered that courtroom certain she would expose bias, but by the end, she became the embodiment of the very thing she claimed to fight. Her words betrayed her, her past condemned her, and her arrogance destroyed her. The courtroom didn't just hand down a ruling that day, it delivered a mirror, forcing Karen to look at the reflection she had spent years avoiding. Judge Judy summed it up best when she said, "Respect isn't optional, neither is the truth." It wasn't a soundbite, it was a principle. And it's the reason her courtroom continues to resonate with millions around the world. Because in an era where lies spread fast and accusations can ruin lives, moments like this remind us all that facts still matter, evidence still matters, integrity still matters. And for everyone watching, the takeaway was clear. Arrogance may walk loudly, but truth walks patiently, and it always arrives. So if you believe in accountability, if you believe that truth should always cut louder than lies, then don't just watch, be part of this community. Smash that like button so more people see stories where hypocrisy collapses under the weight of facts. Comment below with the word truth if you believe no false accusation can stand forever. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel, because every week we bring you real moments where arrogance meets justice, and truth has its day in the spotlight. Remember this: lies may trend, but truth is timeless. And as Karen Mitchell learned the hard way, when you weaponize falsehoods, it's not your target who ends up destroyed, it's you.